Greetings, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm really pleased to see how many of you have shown up online, and we even have a small audience here in the Erickson Kiva this evening. So we are actually gathered tonight for what will be the first of two forums that are, let's stay over here so you all can see me, that are associated with a project that was put together by Dr. Rex Lamore and myself, Stephen Gastire, and then the good folks at the Center for Community and Economic Development of MSU. Our goal in this project was really to look at the possibilities of university investment in our communities. Now, MSU, as the land grant institution in Michigan, is an institution that has been invested in many ways in our communities, through our extension system, through the outreach to our communities, through, in no small part, bringing students to Michigan State University to be students and to gain knowledge and to go back into the state to do work. But we actually started thinking about the extent to which Michigan State University is also directing its resources. As an institution as big as Michigan State University, we have tremendous financial resources. So what we were interested in is whether in this moment, when as a nation we're really reconsidering how should we be investing, how should we be improving access for diversity, equity, inclusion, how should we be improving our investments so that we actually possibly put money into the things that we value most. Those are the communities around us. And so our goal in this project is to investigate if there are possibilities for Michigan State University to actually direct some of its institutional dollars into the kinds of entities that further our communities, that increase opportunities for our communities, especially our most marginalized communities. So So we are in the process of developing what we're calling a feasibility study. This is a study where we're looking at the other examples of investments in communities by entities like universities. But we also want to hear from some of the options that have emerged for community investment. Now, communities get investments in a couple of ways. Everyone loves free money. That comes from grants. But so much of the opportunity that is generated through communities is generated through the kinds of investments that come through loans. And if we know what we know about loans in the United States, what we know about the kinds of investments that are not necessarily free, but provide the capital for people to fulfill their dreams, is that these are exactly the things that have been in limited supply for those more marginalized amongst us. So what we wanted to do tonight was is the first of two forums to investigate options for infusions of capital into our communities. So tonight we're actually going to be hearing from 4 speakers representing entities that have been directly involved in these alternative forms of investment in communities called Community Development Financial Institutions. And so we will have 4 representatives of 4 institutions, 3 of which are CDFIs, and one of which is a large institution that has a big endowment like Michigan State University that has made an effort to invest in community-based efforts for for community development and improvement of quality of life. So we're going to have 4 speakers. The first comes from, the first is CCED. CCED is a nonprofit native CDFI whose focal point is assisting tribal citizens in building financial stability to aid themselves while promoting and protecting culture, dignity, education, health, welfare, and self-efficacy. In their commercial program, CCED has distributed $3,983,204.71 to tribal entrepreneurs and provided 661 hours of small business development assistance, which has generated $7.5 million in local economies and created 164 jobs. We will be hearing from Sean Winters, who will tell us about that initiative. We will also be hearing from Northern Initiatives, which is a CDFI dedicated to providing loans in Northern Michigan. And then last but not least, from Jennifer Hayes, who is the Senior Vice President for Invest Detroit, which has developed community development CDFI loans to communities in Detroit, Michigan. So with that, what I would like to do is turn over the floor to our first presenter. Each presenter will give us about 15 minutes of talk. All right, so our first presenter will be Sean Winters. He's a citizen of the Pokagon Band of the Potawatomi Indians and is the executive director of CCED, Inc. Sean is from Dowagiac, Michigan, and received a BA in marketing from the University of Toledo. He has more than 28 years of experience in finance, marketing, communications, and operations management. Prior to joining CCED in 2011, Sean served as a member of the Professional Golfers Association of America, where, as a golf professional, he managed golf operations and teaching programs. And as such, he was a small business operator himself. He also served 1 year as the Pokagon Band's sales coordinator for the Four Winds Casino and Resorts. In his role with CCED, Sean serves as the vice chair of Minno Dimadzin, the Economic Development Corporation of the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi, responsible for generating non-gaming revenue for the tribe within outlined investment criteria. Sean also served as the secretary for the tribe's ethics board, which provided oversight throughout tribal government. He attends monthly and annual functions that benefit tribal youth academically, culturally equipping them with the tools to make better financial decisions as adults. And he also works with tribal elders to better their financial habits so as to pass down proper financial wisdom to the tribal citizens. Through his experience, Sean has discovered his passion for tribal development and working with people from diverse economic and ethnic backgrounds. With this passion, he reinforces traditional beliefs through conservation of resources and planning for the future to assist in building a solid community. So with that, I want to pass the floor to Sean Winters.
Well, thank you, everybody. It is we're very excited to be here and be a part of the feasibility and the research and everything that potentially that this opportunity might be able to provide. But just real quick, without belaboring anything, I mean, I could talk about CCED and what we do for hours, but I don't want to. I know we don't have that much time, but just real quick about CCED. I mean, we were incorporated back in September of 2009 as a Michigan 501c3. We are a certified native CDFI through the United States Treasury or the CDFI Fund. And just real quick, CCED in Pokagon means big cabbage. It doesn't have necessarily any cultural significance, but it means big cabbage. So anytime that we would who we were to our elders, they would always kind of smile and smirk and giggle a little bit because cabbage meaning being slang back in the day for money, some of our elders got a kick out of that. But like we talked about, a CDFI, again, basically it's a specialized financial institution that works in market niches that are basically underserved. Working with individuals that might not be able to go through banks or credit unions for a variety of financing. So CDFIs can work in affordable home ownership, can work in entrepreneurial or small business capacities, as well as consumer programs. And again, our tribal council really saw a need in our community, as obviously the federal government has designated Indian country as a disadvantaged economic demographic. So really wanted to, more than anything, build capacity within our community. Again, right now across the country, and I know this number changes, constantly, but there are approximately more than 1,300 CDFIs serving in all those different capacities, through small areas, larger metropolitan areas. And a few years ago, we did have 76 native CDFIs. Unfortunately, I hate to report that as of December, we are down to 64. When we talk about underserved areas, sometimes these organizations can fall by the wayside or might not have the opportunities or the resources to continue doing what they're doing. So, these types of, feasibility studies are very, very important, to our community and the folks that, we have the capacity to serve. But, our mission basically is to provide tribal citizens with access to affordable capital, while at the same time practicing responsible lending. The one thing we don't want to do is ever just provide an opportunity to a tribal citizen just under the guise of, we're helping. We want to make sure we're responsible. We want to make sure that we're building capacity, that we're doing things the right way. The last thing we ever want to do is put a tribal citizen in harm's way financially. We want to make sure that we're allowing them the opportunities to do what they need to do for themselves, for their families, and for our community. Because at the same time, we still have kind of a background goal of wanting to strengthen our nation. We want to strengthen our community. But very simply, we work with tribal citizens that cannot go through traditional institutions. We want to build financial capacity, whether that be entrepreneurial, small business, or consumer. But more importantly, we want to educate, we want to empower, we want to enforce responsibility through tradition and culture. We don't ever try to give cultural lessons, but we want to remind them that we're a tribal organization working with tribal citizens, trying to, build, and strengthen, their skills, their information set, their resources, but create balance. And, in our culture, balance can be represented by a circle. And that can mean a lot of different things. It can mean the four directions. It's represented in the medicine wheel. But, when you have harmony, that circle is complete. And when that gets skewed, even though you might not know that, that's when, things can, go a little awry, or, folks might experience a little bit of hardship or some adversity. So we want to make sure that we try and create that balance, because balance comes in a variety of forms. And when you see that happen, or you find somebody, or especially a tribal citizen, find that balance, it's a very exciting and fantastic thing to witness. And even though we're working in a very small financial aspect, finding that, for a citizen or working with them is, there's really not a bigger reward. So we do get to see that from time to time. And, as we go through this, we talk about, our stories and what we do from a quantitative standpoint, but we also try to then find, where is the quality behind some of these numbers. And that's when we talk about return on investment, that social return, that building that human capital is really what we're trying to untap and show, exactly what CDFIs have the power and the capacity to do. But very simply put, what we do is not rocket science, but the avenue and the bridge that the foundation it lays for folks to take advantage of is monumental. So our programs, we have a commercial loan program where we work with either expansion of small business or startup. And we have a consumer program. When we did our kind of a market analysis, and not just our community, but a lot of folks, reliable transportation is a big barrier. And we wanted to make sure that folks were able to, care for their families, seek or obtain new or more valuable employment, but anything that they needed to do from a family standpoint. But we help build that capacity through development services. Anything we can do from business development, whether it be structure, financial projections, any type of market study, anything that they can do to either, increase their awareness, build their skill sets, but anything that sets them in a position to achieve success rather than not. And from a financial standpoint, it gets taken for granted quite a bit, but we like to make sure that our citizens have the opportunity to manage their own personal finances. A lot of times it can be taken for granted, but when people start to fail at that, it's a very serious item that people, kind of put by the wayside, but we want to make sure that it's kept on the radar and people are taking advantage of that and succeeding at that as well. But what we said is like kind of looking at our balance organizationally too, is how we've experienced our growth from day one when we were incorporated. And we did have a small seed investment from the tribe, but we, had our capacity to go ahead and start, performing, our programs and start putting those out to our citizens. And as we started going from loan 1 to loan 10 to, a couple of hundred, we were able to create stories and continue to experience that growth. And with a lot of the kind of the fundraising strategies that we do, those stories become very, very important. And that allows us to establish our relationships. And as we start doing that, as we start building our brand and that foundation of what we do programmatically becomes more solid, we're able to go ahead and kind of continue along that circle of growth for us. But organizationally, programmatically, it provides us balance because as that continues to happen, we're able to fine tune what we do, but more importantly, we know that there's a foundation. We do a lot of, with that storytelling, internally, we do a lot of, surveys post-close and post-maturity because beyond just numbers, again, we're trying to find out what their experience is. What is that doing for their family dynamic? Exactly how does our development assistance or our loan programs, what does that truly equate to, per citizen? Because like I said, it's easy to go ahead and have quantitative data, but we want to put the quality behind it because then we know truly that, that social return is happening. But just real quick, what we've been able to do, like I mentioned, we're working with tribal citizens. So, you're going to have other CDFIs that do, monumentally larger amounts than we do. But, for a small area, Southwest Michigan, Northern Indiana, this is something that, we've been able to quantify and qualify that we know we're having an impact. We get testimonial back. We get folks that have, handshakes and hugs, and we've had tears and, kisses on the cheek, just knowing that, what we're doing is making a difference. But you can see just kind of a quick brief history of our loan origination. Since we closed our first loans in 2012, you can see we had a monumental year with four loans. And then as we kind of hit a nice kind of a growth trajectory, at the end of 19, we were feeling pretty good, especially with the opportunity and the demand that, our citizens were, coming to us with. And obviously we all know what happened in 2020. And like everything else, organizationally, we were still okay, but it was really, trying to be available for, our citizens, during those times. Because, with what we do, it wasn't always on the, the forefront of what everybody wanted to do, but still creating relationships and still providing that resource and, that sounding board so that folks could still do what they needed to do even during those times. And you can see, we took a little dip in 2020 and since then, we have begun to rebound. One thing that kind of follows with this, and this just shows the actual disbursement of what those loans originations look like, and those, again, we had a high point in 19 of, just a little shy of $2.4 million out, both commercially and consumer wise. And then we ended 2022 with just a little bit shy of 3 million. And again, those assets continue to go out into our community. But one of the things that, we're most proud of right now is, again, that, I can't stand up here and take credit for anything that we've done. It is truly the hard work of our tribal citizens and our entrepreneurs and their commitment, to being responsible with the promises they've made from a financial standpoint and continuing working hard. But during 2020, for example, if we put $1 million out prior to the pandemic, we would get probably anywhere from $250,000 to $350,000 back over the course of that year in principal repayments. Again, still fantastic. But when you had the stimulus packages and higher levels of unemployment and all of those resources that were allowed people to still financially function, what we found out is during that pandemic and even still now, in 2020, that $1.8 million we put out, we received about 1.6 back in principal repayments. So what I like to see is that our folks were taking these gifts, so to speak, these financial gifts, and putting them to good use, managing debt service properly. Again, and what we try to do is empower and, kind of, really hold that in high regard and let them feel, really, really fantastic about what they're doing, and knowing that what they're doing is important and they're being an example for themselves and their families. But even now, again, like I said, we put the 2.9 million out last year, and we received probably about 2.3 or 4 back in principal repayments throughout 2022. So that habit, and that routine has maintained, as some of those resources have subsided, our folks are still doing fantastic things. But again, like I said, I didn't want to get, too much into the weeds there, because just showing kind of a little bit of what we do. And, in the introduction, we talked about, what we've done, what some of our entrepreneurs have done. And again, we continue to go ahead and be available, create those relationships. But at the same time, what we really like to do is find that quality behind some of the data that we have, and be able to share that, for opportunities such as this, because as some of my colleagues, will talk about, it's always trying to tell that story. It's always about educating, what the CDFI industry is, and truly, the mechanism behind that, and truly the impact that CDFIs do have, in their communities. And like the CDFI fund, which is a big component to what we do, they've put out, again, billions of dollars into not only Native America, but, just the CDFI industry as well. And just the unbelievable success, data that comes back is incredible. So, one of our big goals throughout being part of, this advisory group is really trying to qualify, what these numbers do and the impact that they are having on individuals, as well as the family capacity, to our tribal nation as a whole, to Southwest Michigan, to Northern Indiana, to our region. And then, finding different ways that we can, do some things together. And there's a lot of exciting things going on in the CDFI industry right now. But thank you very much for the opportunity. And I think we'll probably wait for questions when everything's finished. But action. One of our biggest success stories right now is a commercial flooring outfit out of Galesburg, Michigan, Great Lakes Flooring Specialists. They were basically asked by Bronson Hospital to go into business, and they were, doing well, but kind of victims of their own success. They were outgrowing small, kind of a storage barn, if you will, where they had to put their equipment, their supplies, their inventory. And then we were able to come and work with them, because when you're that young, and a lot of in that industry, when you place a $100,000 order, you have to have $50,000 when you place the order, and then you have to pay the remainder of that, the other $50,000, before you even take possession of the inventory. So we were able to work with them with a revolving line of credit, so that they could go ahead and start securing larger jobs, build up their own reserves. So now they could go ahead and have, 2 methods to secure more business. And since then, as they continued going, that line was increased due to, activity, their profit and revenues were increasing, managing their expenses. Then they outgrew their facility, and they needed a larger space, which they moved into and rented for a number of years. And then we were able to work with them during the pandemic to purchase, this that allows them probably, I don't know how many more employees and, how many more millions of dollars of growth from a revenue standpoint, but they've got the facility that will allow them to do that. And because of the equity that they came into with the property itself, has put them in a very, very healthy financial standpoint. So they're one that we're extremely proud of. It's a family of 4 that has been working together, and usually family business gets a little dicey at times, but they've structured everything very, very well. And it's something that we like to introduce them to at some of our functions, but they have done a bang up job and continue to be a very big fan of ours. Even though we work with them, they are a highlight for us.
Excellent work. Thank you so much, Sean. That was really wonderful. We will move from the Chi Ishibak story to next to Northern Initiatives. And representing Northern Initiatives, we'll have Alyssa Sangali. She's the president and CEO. Alyssa Sangali is committed to building sustainable local economies that put people first. She serves as the third president of Northern Initiatives, a CDFI providing loans and business services to small business owners throughout Michigan. The Northern Initiatives Social Enterprise Platform Initiative provides blending learning resources for small business owners across 38 states. Previously, Alyssa served as the president of Local First for nearly 15 years, bringing over 1,000 West Michigan businesses together to collaborate in building a vibrant community that encourages sustainable business, social enterprise development, and the creation of a more equitable and inclusive region. There, she founded Good for Michigan, a statewide movement of businesses committed to measure, certify, and improve their impact on their employees, community, and environment. As a consultant and speaker, Alyssa has magnified her impact in communities around the world. She is a founding Ball Fellow, now Common Future, and a B Corp Measure What Matters champion. Alyssa is a former Social Venture Circle board member and currently serves on the board of RSF's Social Impact Fund and Michigan Community Capital. So without further ado, I will turn over the floor to Alyssa Sangali.
Thank you very much. Well, I just wanted to say thank you again for the invite to present tonight. It's an honor to be here, and I'm so excited to share the work of Northern Initiatives alongside Sean and Jen, and to hear the perspective of the Kresge Foundation. I thought that I would start with a slide that actually showcases a loan that Northern Initiatives worked on in partnership with MSU, the MSU extension, just to really make that connection to the land grant university. This is an entrepreneur on the southwest side of the state that we funded, and MSU extension provided technical assistance as he was working to grow his farm. For those of you not familiar, Northern Initiatives is a CDFI or Community Development Finance Institution. And we were founded 30 years ago now by Northern Michigan University, actually up in Marquette, Michigan, because the university was very concerned about the closure of large industries, of mines and other manufacturing businesses that were providing good jobs to people in the Upper Peninsula. And so Northern Initiatives was formed 30 years ago. We started as a university department and spun out. We are an independent nonprofit now. But that's our origin story. And at this point, we're serving 77 Michigan counties. So all of these areas that are in green on this map of the state of Michigan. But we also have a few loans in Wisconsin, just across the border, to small businesses. And our focus really is on helping small businesses start and grow to be able to create jobs and to build wealth in their communities. Since 1994, we have invested $94 million in small business loans throughout the state. The average loan size has been $50,000 in more rural places, and in more urban places, it's closer to $250,000. And that's just based on the needs of the businesses that we're funding. And the businesses that we've funded have created 7,000 jobs. And each of the photos I'm going to show you is from one of our customers in various parts of the state. This is from Sweet Pea's Burmese Kitchen, which is a startup that's launching in Battle Creek, Michigan. So we focus on small business loans exclusively, anywhere from a $1,000 loan to get a business started up to $500,000. There are customers that we have multiple loans with as we're supporting them in different stages of growth. We help businesses at all stages. So in any given year, 30% of the businesses we support are startups. Many are to women or people of color, and a vast majority of our loans are in low to moderate income census tracts throughout the state of Michigan. We lend differently than a bank or a more traditional financial institution. We're not so much looking at we're not making decisions based on the collateral that's there, which matters if a loan goes bad. We do look at that, but we don't make our lending decisions based on that. We also look at credit score, but we don't make our lending decisions based on that. We instead are really thinking about the character and the relationship of that we can build, and that we learn from stories about entrepreneurs in their community, about their capacity to grow, their experience in an industry, and also their cash flow. And so this is another one of our customers. If you were to ask me a success story, this is one that's close to home. I live between Marquette and Grand Rapids, and GR Noir is a wine bar that opened in Grand Rapids, actually right as the pandemic was hitting, a challenging time to be a startup. But they have just absolutely thrived, and it's one of my favorite businesses in our portfolio. All of our businesses receive technical support. In addition to receiving loans, we actually have a team of coaches that we employ that are on our staff. And this is really important because it can be really lonely to be an entrepreneur. And just because you launch a bakery because you love to bake doesn't mean you know about HR issues and cash flow and marketing and all of those things that are really complicated for a business. And so we have a team of coaches on staff that help provide that support for businesses to help them grow and thrive. And it also helps us make sure that our businesses are successful and that we can repay the debt that we owe to the entities that we borrow from. CDFIs are what are called intermediary relenders. So we are borrowing money from a variety of different sources, and then we are loaning that in accordance with our mission. And for Northern Initiatives, that mission is around creating small businesses and helping them create jobs and community wealth throughout the state. In addition, a number of years ago, because we have such a vast territory of customers and our staff is spread throughout the state, we felt the need to go online. And so we developed an online technical assistance portal called Initiate. And this is a software platform that we use to support our customers with resources around money, marketing, and management. But it's now being used by 24 CDFIs across the United States, and it's being used in 38 states. And so this provides 24/7 assistance to small businesses who, might want to be learning at this time of day when our office is closed. And so we want them to be able to dive in and work on their cash flow templates now, or learn about how to set up, a successful website or social media campaign now. And so this is one of the resources that we have created over time. In certain parts of the state, we also lead business planning cohorts. So this is a group of entrepreneurs that just graduated from one of those cohorts in Battle Creek, Michigan. And these are 10-week-long courses where people who are interested, who are in the idea stage of launching a business come, and we help them put together their business plans, and we help them understand what it would mean to own a business. And they can decide to either move forward with that or not. Either is successful in our mind, but we're proud of them for exploring the concept. And if they do graduate from these courses and are interested in receiving loan funds from us, we're there to support them in that way as well. I think I mentioned earlier that on any given year, 30% of the businesses that we support are startups. This is a picture of one of our newest customers in Kalamazoo, Dabney & Co. It's a great restaurant and bar. And last year, we were proud to support almost 70% of our businesses were startups. And this is also really important because we focus on funding businesses and communities that have not had traditional access to capital. So folks may not have a mortgage, or they may not own a home where they could leverage the equity in their home to purchase a house, or they may not have a rich uncle or aunt that they could call, or grandparents for inherited wealth. We really focus on helping folks who don't have that kind of family or generational wealth for a variety of reasons. We're also the means through which a number of foundations around the state of Michigan think about investing locally. And so at this point, we have 7 different community foundations that have lent us money that then we reloan in a community around the state. And those loans vary in size and scope. In some places, a foundation is lending us $250,000 that we're loaning out to businesses in the community. In other places, a foundation's loaning us $10 million that we're loaning out to small businesses in the community. And the terms of those loans are different. In general, we try to borrow money between 0 and 3% in terms of interest, because then we need to attach a fee that helps cover our expenses. But this is a way that many foundations think about. It's an increasingly common way for many foundations and institutions to think about investing in their place and setting criteria around things that they care about and that they value. So as an example, each of the foundations that have invested in us are doing so because they want to create and support small businesses as a means of creating wealth, lowering the racial wealth divide, creating wealth in more rural places where there have been more extractive industries, and creating good jobs. We're also really proud of our very rural Michigan roots. As I mentioned, we were formed in the UP. We expanded to the Lower Peninsula just 15 years ago and just began our lending in more urban places 10 years ago. And in 2022, we renewed our focus on lending to diverse borrowers and to people of color entrepreneurs. And this is another delightful customer to visit if you get the chance in Battle Creek, Michigan. It's Cafe Rica. It's 2 brothers that own a wonderful coffee shop, but it's a great place for breakfast or lunch. With that, I will stop and transition. I do want to acknowledge at the end, if we have a few minutes at the end of Jen's presentation, maybe we could tell you a little bit more about something all of the CDFIs in the state are working on together, which is the creation of a Michigan CDFI coalition to make it easier to find us, because most people don't grow up hearing about CDFIs. They grow up hearing about credit unions or banks or other means of investment. And so we're trying to make it a little easier for institutions like MSU to think about us as means of investment. Thanks.
For right now, let's move on to our third CDFI presenter. Jennifer Hayes is the Senior Vice President of Operations and Policy at Invest Detroit. Jennifer Hayes joined Invest Detroit in January 2018 and has over 20 years of experience in organizational management, public policy, external affairs, and economic development. She is responsible for a variety of projects, including technology management, internal process improvements, and management reporting. She also leads the organization's public policy work. Prior to joining Invest Detroit, Ms. Hayes served as the Director of Administration and Outreach with the Business Leaders for Michigan. She began her career in the Michigan legislature, holding various positions in the Michigan House and Senate. So without further delays, Ms. Hayes, I will turn over the floor to you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the kind introduction. And again, actually, let me make sure I go back to the first page. Thank you for having me here today. I'm excited to be joined with some great colleagues from around the state. I wanted to just give a quick shout out to a couple of my colleagues and that are here today. I think Kiona's on the call with me today. I'm not sure our CEO Dave has joined yet, but if not, he should be shortly. So they'll make sure that I say everything correctly as I walk through the slide as well. And they'll be here to help answer some questions as we move forward. So Invest Detroit is a nonprofit CDFI. We're also a CDE. So for anyone who is not familiar with CDEs, you have to have a CDE in order to apply for and administer new market tax credits. So we do that as well. We've been around in some form for almost, I guess, over 26 years. We received our CDFI certification in 2011. We, as you can see here on the slide, we are really focused on economic growth in the city of Detroit, as well as around the state with our venture capital fund. We focus in 4 primary areas. We do real estate lending and products. We have a program that supports commercial and industrial businesses as well as small businesses. Those 3 programs are specific to the city of Detroit, but we also have a venture capital fund that supports early stage startup investment all over the state of Michigan. And our 4 kind of primary goals as an organization are to increase density, create jobs, create thriving neighborhoods, and do it in an inclusive way. I wanted to just share a little bit of our impact from last year. In 2022, we had our biggest deployment year ever as an organization, which we're very excited about. We deployed over $50 million through all 4 of those programs and leveraged another $380 million. You can see here we were able to support tons of square feet of investment in different retail and commercial properties. We supported 70 businesses and projects, as well as creating a few hundred housing units, including affordable housing units. So really excited for a great year that we had last year. As an organization since inception, we've deployed over $540 million and been able to leverage almost $3.6 billion as well. And you can see some of the other impact metrics here. So this is over the life of the organization to date. And I'm just going to dive into a couple of these programs a little bit more. So for our small business loan program, the picture you see here is Bobat Fair, which is an amazing East African restaurant in New Center, Detroit. Amazing. If you haven't been there, highly recommend. They're a great partner of ours. Our small business team, like Alyssa, is a big part of our organization. Our loan sizes range anywhere from 50,000 up to 750, sometimes a little bit larger if it is a small business owner who is purchasing and remodeling real estate. But we don't do microloans. We're more of a larger small business lender. We started this program in 2009. And this year we're going to hopefully, cross our fingers, hit our 100th business served, which we're really excited about. We use the products to support anything from, purchasing a building and renovating it to tenant improvements, purchasing fixtures and equipment. So we're able to support a variety of small businesses in the city of Detroit. For our commercial and industrial program, this is a program that has kind of grown and shrunk and grown over the history of the organization. It's been impacted by just the economy in Detroit and the state as a whole, but we're really kind of doubling down our efforts in this area to support some of the larger scale businesses that are really job creators in the city of Detroit, especially trying to get spaces ready for businesses, give them that gap financing that they need to really provide jobs for Detroiters. And the loan sizes here are probably going to be closer to $1 million to $2.5 million, depending on the size of the business and their needs. And then real estate is a really big part of who we are as an organization. It was really how we got our start a long time ago. So we originally started doing a lot of the gap financing in the central business district, kind of greater downtown area. And then over the past several years, we've really expanded our efforts into a lot of the neighborhoods and commercial corridors throughout the city, which I'll touch on in just a minute. This building that you're seeing here is the Parker Durand. It's located in the Villages neighborhood in Detroit, which we provided some gap financing for. Most of our projects can be smaller or larger. So our real estate loans can really go for as low as $150,000 all the way up to $2.5 million. Sometimes a little bit larger if we have our new market tax credit program involved as well. So I want to talk a little bit about our strategic neighborhood fund. For anyone who's familiar with the mayor's work in this, the strategic neighborhood fund has identified 10 neighborhoods within the city of Detroit to focus some investment in these 4 areas: streetscape improvements, investment in parks, commercial corridors, and single family homes. Invest Detroit is serving as the fiduciary for a lot of the foundation dollars coming into the community. We're also helping to oversee the commercial corridor strategy. So in addition to deploying dollars through that fund, we also use some of our own programming to help support commercial corridor investments in the 10 neighborhoods. And this is a map of the city that will show you where those 10 neighborhoods are. The red line is the proposed, or I guess it's pretty definite at this point, but the Joe Louis Greenway that's in process of being built in the city of Detroit, which will also spur likely some additional commercial corridor improvements. This is just an example of when you think about the 4 different areas in which we are investing in the neighborhoods, this kind of shows kind of where we're at in pre-development construction and the completed phases. So we're moving along really well, but this is really, when you think about it, it's a 5 to 7 year plan to really, do the neighborhood planning, make sure you're doing the community engagement with the folks in the neighborhood, understand what their needs and wants are. And then when you roll out these layers of projects combined with public, private, and philanthropic dollars, it takes a lot of work and time to get these projects going, but we're making a lot of really great progress in the neighborhoods. And this is just an example of one of the neighborhoods we've spent a lot of time in. This is the Livernois McNichols neighborhood. This is on McNichols. This is an example of where, in partnership with the city and some partners, we've essentially taken a little micro district in this corridor, and we have either purchased buildings or had developers purchase buildings where we have redeveloped them, or they're in process of being redeveloped. And over the next few years, you're going to see all of these buildings highlighted here, redeveloped and be occupied. And you'll see here, we've got diverse developers involved here. We've got a variety of different activities. We have one of our consultant partners helping to provide developer TA. So this is an example of what we're doing in these neighborhoods across the city. And then one of the other programs that I know I'm personally really excited about, and Kiana can talk a little bit more about with any questions, is last year we launched what we're calling the Ebiera Fund. And it is a fund to provide capital and resources to emerging Black and Brown developers from the city of Detroit to help them, give them capital to help them grow their businesses, to have equity to put in projects. We're really excited about this program. We've closed our first deal. We've approved another 4, and we have a pipeline of almost 40 more development firms that are in our pipeline to look at for finance. So it's a really exciting program, and it helps support developers from the communities to be able to grow their capacity in the city of Detroit. And then lastly, just want to touch on our venture fund. Again, it's a statewide fund that provides early seed money for startups. They've supported over 190 businesses, deployed over $25 million, and create over 2,100 jobs. This is, it's statewide. We actually have a couple of companies in the UP that they've supported as well, which is really exciting. But they also, what makes them unique is they do have an impact lens. So one of their priorities as being a statewide funder here is to support startups from Detroit, women, immigrants, people of color. So we are, as an organization, really prioritize kind of the impact space for us as an organization. And I think you asked us to identify some challenges, and I'm sure a lot of the CDFIs on here would agree. Funding is always a challenge, which we could talk a little bit more about if you guys would like to, but as well as operational support and talent, I would say are 3 of the challenges that I know we constantly see at Invest Detroit and have heard from our partners as well.
That's wonderful. So thank you very, very much. So with that, now we have, first, do we have any questions specifically for Jennifer?
Yes. Do you think you have influenced your developers into like your neighborhood-oriented programs, like building the like improvements in street corridors or streetscapes, as you refer to them, or have they done similar work in the past?
That's a really good question, and I'll let Kiana jump in if I don't answer this correctly. But I would say a lot of the developers that we're working with through the Ebiera Fund have done some development. It could be maybe one small project, or have done some other like housing projects, like a couple of houses, but they want to get into larger scale or additional redevelopment. And so they need additional capital to help them do that. Or maybe they also need some technical assistance resources to just help them kind of be able to grow their business. So I would say it's a variety of developers that we're seeing come through the fund. Is that a good summary, Kiana?
That's accurate.
Fantastic. Yeah. So I think maybe we can start with Alyssa's overview of the CDFI coalition. And what's going to happen, what will happen now is I want the people who are specifically representing CDFIs to answer a question first. And then we'll move to Aaron and have him talk from the perspective of the Kresge Foundation. Okay.
Great.
So quickly, could you just tell us a little bit about that, Alyssa, about that CDFI coalition that you started to tell us about a minute ago?
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity. And Jen, I'm hoping we can talk about this together as we're both on the executive committee of the coalition together. But the CDFI coalition so as I mentioned, most people are not familiar with what CDFIs are. And so there are a number of community development finance institutions around the state of Michigan who are doing really good work, especially around supporting the growth of small business and creation of affordable housing, in addressing all different kinds of all of the different inadequacies in terms of access to capital around race, gender, other sorts of historical barriers. And so we have decided that it's time for us to organize, to get together, to share that story of what CDFIs do, and make it a little easier for organizations to find us and to know how they can invest. And so we have not publicly announced this yet, and I guess we're publicly announcing it with you. We've started to tease it with certain groups, but we have organized, and there are a group of us coming together to form a coalition to help raise awareness of the work that the organizations like you're hearing from tonight do around the state, and opportunities to invest in the support of our work in hopes that it becomes a little bit easier for institutional investors and others to think about moving down that path. Jen, is there anything you would add to that?
No, I think that's great. I think the only one thing I would add is I think I would just say that it's been exciting, I think, to meet partners from around the state. I know, Alyssa, you and I hadn't met before we started working on this coalition, as well as some of the policy work around the CDFI fund creation. But I think there's a lot for us to learn from each other and to support each other, and not only in our programming, but best practice sharing. A lot of us, although we're in the same space and we do different lending, there's a lot that we can learn from each other and help each other grow. So I'm excited about how the coalition can really impact our community moving forward.
That's really a very helpful overview of this exciting new coalition. I think CDFIs do provide this opportunity, and you're right that most people don't know what they are, right? I teach every semester. I get to teach community development. I introduce the idea to students, and they almost never have heard of them. So this is a very exciting opportunity. I wanted to loop back. All of you at the end of your slide mentioned money as one of the things that you need more of. I'm wondering if you all would be willing to talk a little bit about sort of how much more could you absorb, right? Because presumably there's a limit. If we did get bigger other institutions in the state to donate money, is there how much could you actually absorb and turn around and get out to your constituents?
Jen, I would love for you to chime in on this. I will just start by saying that last year, the CDFI coalition came together to ask the state for support for more funding for us to use for our project. And that request was for the creation of a $150 million CDFI fund to be used around the state of Michigan. We did receive a state allocation for half of that. We're asking for another half of that, but those are the kinds of numbers that we're talking about. There is a lot of money that could move through these CDFI entities into spaces that would really address the kinds of concerns and issues we're talking about.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good answer, Alyssa. And I would say too, just to give context for everyone, and I think Sean touched on this, but there are about 50 CDFIs in the state of Michigan that are currently investing. About 43 of them are headquartered or Michigan based. And there are about another 8 or so that are what we would call either national or multi-state CDFIs that are headquartered outside of Michigan, but have been partners in investing in Michigan for almost a decade or over a decade now. So there are quite a few organizations that are here. So, and I would say and I guess I can speak for Invest Detroit, and Kiona can also, she's our head of lending, so she understands, she knows how big we could get. But I would say if we know there's the ability to grow our capacity in a really thoughtful way and we can strategically plan for it from an operations and staffing standpoint, there are a lot of programs that I think a lot of us would like to grow and create if we know there were tools and financial resources to help us do that. Because we also have to think about organizational sustainability and thoughtful growth. But knowing there's a steady resource there that we can rely on helps create confidence and stability within that growth for us. So I don't know if I have a number for you, but I think when you think about 50 institutions, there's a lot of room for growth and programming, I would say.
Wonderful. Those were great answers. Sean, I want to give you a chance to chime in as well. Do you want to give an answer to that question?
From our standpoint, and again, speaking more in a smaller, space is, we look strategically, at where we'd like to be from an organizational standpoint. And, we, kind of worked with almost like a capped target market. So 2 ways that we're going to grow is either, trying to work with more tribes, at some point, maybe expand outside of tribal space, but at the same time, knowing the challenges and the barriers that our target market does face and do have, further access to capital allows us to investigate newer products. And thus, so like right now, we have a commercial component, we have a consumer component, but like we mentioned, one of the things that we constantly get inquiries about is affordable home ownership. With our size, and if that capital were available, that would become a very strong feasibility and reality for us. And again, just the number of individuals that you're able to help. So if you were to put $1 on it, it's like, well, let's go high and let's see if it works or not. But that's from our standpoint strategically, that's where it would help a CDFR of our size.
Wonderful. Thank you all. I think with that, I would like to, unless we have other questions from the audience, I would like to now move to our 4th presenter, who will provide a slightly different perspective. So Aaron Siebert is the managing director of the social investment practice at the Kresge Foundation. He previously served as a social investment officer supporting the American Cities and Detroit programs at Kresge. He joined the foundation in 2016. Prior to Kresge, he served as executive director of JP Morgan Chase Bank, where he was involved in community development banking focused on the new market tax credits and historic tax credit investing. He started his career in impact investing at Sinair, formerly the Great Lakes Capital Fund, addressing affordable housing, and previously worked with Legal Aid of Central Michigan. He has served on the board of directors for the Michigan Magnet Fund, Lake Trust Credit Union, and the Core Cities Strategic Fund Advisory Board. A native of Michigan, Aaron earned a bachelor in business administration and corporate finance and accounting from Central Michigan University in Mount Pleasant, where apparently they got lots of snow yesterday, and has a Juris Doctorate from Michigan State University College of Law.
Okay, I'll try to keep it quick. So for those who don't know us, Kresge is a privately endowed foundation. We're coming up on our 100-year anniversary. We're founded by Sebastian Kresge, who is the K in Kmart. And I suspect at least some of us of a certain vintage will remember Kmart fondly. Original gifts, a series of gifts that added up to about 60 million. We're about 4 billion in total assets now. We work all across the country and have a small program in South Africa. But these are our program areas. And when I say program areas, these are our grant-making buckets. So our American Cities program focuses in Memphis, New Orleans, and Fresno. They've got arts and culture, our Detroit program, which is our largest program, education program, social investments, which is us, human services, health, and environment. The two place-based programs, as I said, are American Cities in Detroit. The rest of the programs are place agnostic. What they care about are sort of narrowly defined issue areas. And I think I try to, whenever I do lectures on this topic, I try to give like a lay of the land on private foundation. So, we were all largely created sort of post Robert Barron era. We were sort of late in the vintage. But the deal was very rich people got to donate their wealth to these private charitable organizations and avoid full taxation. And in exchange, those assets are locked up into these trusts in perpetuity. And most importantly, for politicians, they weren't allowed to use those assets to influence public opinion through lobbying. And that was a deal that was struck with FDR and through successor administration. So we are one of those private foundations, and our principal activity is grant making. The math that you can do roughly is you take the total size of the endowment. For us, it's about $4 billion, multiply it by about 5.5%. And that's how much we spend every year. The math on a private foundation, or the way that we sort of live forever, is to take our endowment of about $4 billion and try to earn roughly 8.5% of it on it. You spend another point on overhead and you pocket the remainder. And that's how the endowment grows over time. So it's a game of basically balancing your endowment returns with your charitable spending, and then trying to grow that endowment over time so you can grow your grant making. And that's how most private foundations, again, of our vintage operate today. Specifically related to our work, we're the social investment practice. So there are typically two sides of a house in a private foundation. There's the endowment office, which their job is to run around and invest the corpus of the endowment across the globe. And we're in, I think, 36 different countries. We've got huge exposures in all kinds of asset classes and sectors. And, it is run like a little mini private equity shop inside of the private foundation. And they run around the world and try to make that 8.5%. On the other side of the house is the charitable side, which is, most private foundations is grant making. So these are program officers, managing directors, learning and evaluation people, folks who do the work of grant making. And most private foundations of our size, I would say sort of over $1 billion, who are working nationally or internationally, what they are ultimately trying to do is take all the grants that they might make in a year, in 5 years, over a decade, and they're trying to do the 1 + 1 = 3 thing, where the sum of the grant making that they are making is greater than the sum of its parts, or the impact of the grant making is greater than the sum of its parts. So they do a lot of what's called systems change work. And every private foundation has some sort of North Star. For us, we serve low-income people in America's cities. So everything that we do is in cities, and everything we do is supposed to directly benefit low-income people. And all private foundations have different missions based on their organizational documents, based on their boards, based on their strategies. No two are the same. It's a big landscape. And what works at a community foundation versus a family office versus a private foundation like us is just different. But we all are playing in the CDFI space in different ways, and I will talk about that a little bit more. My practice, or the team that I lead, is our social investment practice. So we are kind of the third leg of that stool in the private foundation world. We do very, very little grant making. We do impact investing. So of that 5%, I get 50-ish million, 55 million a year to deploy into debt and equity and guarantees and strategic deposits and all the kind of tools that CDFIs and other financial institutions use. And we are an impact first investor. So the first thing we want to do in the world is generate impact for low income people in American cities. The second thing we want to do is we would like to get our money back. And the third thing we would like to do is make money on that money if we can, but we're in that order. So unlike the endowment people, which I don't work for the endowment people, Our mission here is to generate impact. And so we are a heavy partner with CDFIs as a sort of vector of change. And I'll sort of talk about that. I'm going to skip over our portfolio, I think, because that's not super interesting. But we think about the CDFI fund and CDFIs sort of very holistically. You know, the CDFI industry formally has been around since 94. I think I might ask my friend Christy to catch me on that, but it was the Clinton administration. But loan funds have been around a lot longer than that. And really the MacArthur Foundation and the Ford Foundation, CEI Maine, and a couple trade unions got together and convinced the Clinton administration that we needed to set up a different kind of financing system that would account for impacts beyond financial return. And there's a really, really good book called Democratizing Finance that I would recommend to anybody who's interested on the history of CDFIs that sort of goes into that detail. But, you know, this is sort of general role of the CDFI fund, what it does, how it partners, et cetera, and how we, generally speaking, have worked with CDFIs in the past. We've worked with them on the bond guarantee program, which is a program that the CDFI fund at Treasury run. We do matching investments for certain CDFIs for their grant applications to the fund. We help do growth into different geographies. You can read it all. I also want to point out the fact that the CDFI world is a pretty big world, right? It's 30 years matured at this point. I think we're, I forget how many hundreds of millions. It's got to be billions at this point, I would think. But again, maybe Christy from Opportunity Finance will quote me on this. It's a relatively mature market, but it's made up of small CDFI loan funds that you have seen here. And it's also made up of giant CDFIs that issue $100 million public debt issuances and do very sophisticated, very large private equity transactions and large multi-billion-dollar credit unions and shareholding banks and everything in between. So it's when you think CDFIs, we've got a really good representation here of loan funds, but the world of CDFIs is much larger, and I think it's 1,600 or something like that across the country right now that are certified. So it's a pretty big space, and it has matured relatively rapidly. Back to my slide. I was asked to do a couple examples of how Kresge works with CDFIs, and then I'll talk a little bit about our endowment work. So I'm going to pick on two of my friends. One of them are here, obviously, with Invest Detroit. So as I said, we partner a lot with CDFIs as a vector for change. Invest Detroit's a really good example. Started out as a not certified CDFI. And, Kiona and Jen may have heard the stories about how their boss was relatively reluctant to go through the CDFI certification process at the time because it is a pain in the butt. But over time, we have run $16.7 million in grants from 2011 to 2023 through Invest Detroit, $18.5 million in PRI capital. We've had zero loss on any of that money to Invest Detroit. And the average expected return on those investments, I did quick math on, was about 2.75%. So when we were hearing about the sort of need for spread lending, you borrow at a lower cost, you lend at a higher cost. This is about where we have been with Invest Detroit. Some of these numbers are a bit of a misnomer because Invest Detroit's a pass-through for a lot of large project funding, including the Strategic Neighborhood Fund, which they certainly manage, but is largely an initiative of the city, or at least a partnership with the city. We ran dollars through Invest Detroit to the M1 Rail project. And beyond just the financial support that we've provided, we've got folks on Invest Detroit's board. We paid for their CDFI certification and helped hire a consultant to help them work through that. We've done a number of co-investment opportunities where Invest Detroit was providing debt typically into a transaction, and we may have direct investment into that transaction, always in Detroit. And then we try to sort of run around and promote them as much as we can through other investing vehicles and other philanthropic partnerships that we have nationally. A different example is our friends at Capital Impact, now part of Momentous Capital. You can see the stats here on the left. Less grant support. Momentous, or Capital Impact Partners, is a nationwide CDFI, but we worked, it was over a decade ago, might be 20 years now, to bring Capital Impact into Detroit. and provided them with general operating support to set up their office in Detroit. We've invested $9.8 million in PRI capital to them. We have a 0% loss rate with capital impact, which is very typical for our CDFI investments. And our average return with them is a little bit higher, about 3%. We've done a bunch of national, I'm sorry? Okay. We've done a bunch of national convenings with capital impact partners. We led a whole series of investments around federally qualified healthcare centers with them, sat on their strategy committees. We've done co-investment with them as well and helped bring them into new markets. As I said, Detroit being the biggest example of it. Investments in CDFI's total for Kresge, we're a pretty big investor in the sector. About 124 million in total historically out of our PRI pool. We've got 40 separate investments that we have done to roughly 30 partners. We have lost $0 on CDFIs in our sort of history of investing, which is coming up on 15 years now. Average expected returns are in that 2.2 to 5% range, which is pretty typical for CDFI. Debt, which is almost always how it comes in. And that average duration on our investments is around 10 years. So that money stays out there for long enough for it to be patient for the underlying borrowers. I think I'm going to cap my comments. Let me stop sharing my screen by just saying, when you think about pension funds, endowments, and the like, MSU's endowment and Kresge's endowment, most of the private foundation investment into CDFIs has come out of the charitable side of the house, like it has for Kresge. The major reason for that, or maybe the couple reasons for that, is about scale. Most private foundations, pension funds, et cetera, want to move a lot of money. So our typical investment in any single manager is no less than 25 million. And we typically don't want to do anything that we can't scale up to 100 million. So for a lot of CDFIs, that can be challenging to absorb that kind of capital. The second issue for private foundations is that spending requirement. So on the 5% that we have to spend every year, we really need to make about 8.5% to stay ahead of inflation. There's a ceiling to the kind of capital that you can lend to CDFIs. And you heard from a couple of the panelists, they can't borrow money at 6, 7, 8% because their borrowers can't borrow money at 6, 7, 8%. There's no overhead allocation for the CDFIs there. And for private foundations, the challenge is when we take concessionary return, what it means is we shrink our grant budget. And nobody wants fewer grant dollars. So it is always a balancing act for us as to how we support CDFIs and grow their balance sheets while still maintaining the general operating support dollars, which is probably 75% of our grant budget is general operating dollars, which is a very high number for a private foundation. So the way that we have typically invested is by using the kind of capital tools that my team has at its disposal and provide things like subordinated debt. So we may be able only to lend $1 million or $2 million or $3 million to a CDFI, and they might need 10 to do the thing that they want to do. But if we can lend them the $2 million to $3 million at a discounted rate, and we can take on losses before a bank takes on losses, then the bank's money tends to become cheaper because it's more secure. And so that's kind of the construct that many CDFIs operate with today. And many, many loan funds, the typical math is 5% cash funded loan loss from their own balance sheets or from grant making, 10 to 15% of subordinated debt from foundations or other philanthropic organizations. And then the rest of the, whatever I said, 75% or 85% of that capital comes from senior lenders that are motivated both to do good because they want their money back and they'll get a decent return, and from the Community Reinvestment Act, which is a banking regulation that encourages banks to lend to CDFIs. We are seeing some encouraging signs, though, particularly in the corporate treasury space, as well as the pension fund space, because CDFIs have an extraordinarily low loss rate. The way that pension funds in particular and growing corporate treasuries think about CDFIs as an asset class are really what's called fixed income, right? So if you were holding corporate bonds, treasuries, et cetera, safe investments, with modest returns, but safe investments, and that are pretty predictable over time. And for pension funds in particular, who do not have the same constraints as private foundations and university endowments, that's a relatively attractive opportunity for them in a limited way, because they're not going to be able to take 2.5%, 3% for the entire portfolio. They have pensioners they have to take care of, but as part of the mix, that works. Similarly, with corporates, you see most of the major tech companies, Netflix, PayPal, Google, I'm trying to think who else, have been investing in CDFIs relatively robustly lately. The challenge with them is liquidity risk. Most of those corporate treasuries want the ability to cash out their investment within 12 to 24 months. Some have gone as long as 5, and I just heard of a 7-year corporate treasury investment. That's okay. And if you're doing business lending, that may work for you. But for folks like Kiona, on real estate, it tends to be a little harder to hold that kind of paper, because the real estate deals in Detroit tend to not let you cash out after 5 years and get your money back. So it's a bit of a balancing game. But I will say, generally speaking, CDFIs are really having a moment now. There has never been more money in this sector in the 20 years I've been working in it. It's mostly, though, not coming from private foundations. It is mostly coming from new family office entrants, from public sector players like universities, like pension funds, like state governments, setting up their own CDFI funding apparatus. And we are seeing more federal dollars flow through CDFIs than we ever have before. So, I'm relatively bullish on the sector. I think there are ways for university endowments and universities as a whole to think about supporting the sector, even if it's not solely based on a large university endowment allocation. But we have found the sector as a piece of the larger community development finance sector, which CDFIs are only a piece of that, as being a really, really good leverage point and a highly effective way to get at the impacts that we are seeking. So maybe I'll pause there.
All right. Do we have questions for Aaron that folks would like to ask, either from online or from the room? So we have a question in the chat box from Terry Link, who asks, UM and MSU have endowments collectively worth more than $20 billion. At 5% tithe directed to Michigan CDFIs would provide $1 billion. If they were direct to CDFIs, what kind of return on investment could they expect? Say 2 to 5%?
I think if assuming that's directed to me, I would assume so. That would be the sort of typical range. 5% be on the high side. I think 1 to 3 is what typically allows. It depends on the CDFI who you're talking about, but I would say 1 to 3 is the sort of typical range. Those rates have been creeping up, obviously, with inflation. And I just want to make the point that most university endowments operate the way that a private foundation endowment works, where they have to spend that 5%. That is typically remitted straight to the university, and then the university decides, right? Is it scholarships? Is it new programs? Is it faculty salary? Whatever the thing is, right? So not to say that they couldn't do that, and there's no problem with an endowment doing that, but they should already be functionally tithing back to the university at a minimum of 5%.
Do any of our CDFI directors want to weigh in on that question?
I can take a quick jump in. I would agree with Aaron. I think a lot depends on the CDFI, the industry, the work as to the rate of return, but I wouldn't have anything different to say based on what he commented on, but I think that's right. The other thing I was going to add is, Aaron touched on this too, CDFIs, I believe the most recent data that came out from OFN, which is our national organization that represents a lot of us, the default rate on average for our community is less than 1%. So just to put that in perspective, it's incredibly low, especially compared to the traditional financial industry. So we are definitely very proud of that low of a default rate.
I would just also add, because I get asked in a lot of conversations with foundations that are just thinking about investing in CDFIs for the first time, how we manage our risk. Each of us maintains a certain amount of loan loss reserve within our portfolio. We're analyzing each of the loans regularly. We're in communication with those borrowers. I mean, the reason you're seeing numbers like a 0% rate of or 0% default from Aaron is because we are actually managing those relationships all at a very local level, which, if you think about it, is very different than the way we're otherwise investing, than that endowment is otherwise invested, right? Where there's actually not a lot of control. In these relationships, there actually is a lot of control, and there are many more direct relationships.
Other questions? So the question really is, this sounds like something imminently feasible for universities to be invested in. Why do you all think we're not already doing this? Why aren't we already making these kinds of investments?
Go ahead, Aaron. I'll let you go first.
Okay. I mean, I can tell. So I talk to a lot of pension funds. I talk to a lot of endowments. There's a lot of noise right now around sort of like ESG principles and sort of defining fiduciary duty. What is the obligation of a CIO's office to its principal? What is the fiduciary duty? Do you open up yourself to liability if you take a concessionary return on your principal assets? This is ultimately going to be litigated in a lot of ways, and some states are trying to preempt those actions of their state level institutions. I think there's no right answer here. It really kind of depends on who you are and what you're trying to do. And as I said, for Kresge, we don't put a lot of our endowment into our impact investments on a concessionary return because our board has decided that our highest and best use as an institution is to maximize our grant making to nonprofits. That is the reason we exist in the world. So anything that takes away from our general operating support of nonprofits, we have to look real hard at. And so if our endowment office says, we can look at a fixed income fund that has, almost instantaneous liquidity, is 100% rated, it is fully asset backed, and we can earn, 5.5% yield on that portfolio, or we can go into a CDFI that's going to give us no more than 3%, is going to be illiquid, and is going to have a bunch of sort of very bespoke loans that are under collateralized. They're going to argue it's a breach of fiduciary duty. I think it's pretty clear that that's not true, but it depends a little bit on the state that you're in right now as to how true or not true that is. But I think that doesn't mean that you are in or out of the game. As I have said to folks, we've got managers in our endowment who buy a lot of secondary market paper from CDFI lenders who issue SBA debt. So we may not be a direct funder, but we are creating the secondary market and buying the liquidity in the system necessary to replenish the capital into small business lenders. And we're buying a collateralized note that's enhanced by the US government. And that is a way that we can sort of contribute. I think it's also a matter of, what is your reason for being in the world? And as a university, particularly a land grant university, I think it's pretty clear what you're supposed to do in the world and who you're there to serve. And I think sort of investing in the communities where you exist and where you're drawing students from, et cetera, makes sense. And I think if you push it to its sort of illogical end, which I tried to do with a lot of philanthropic organization endowments, and say, so if you had a manager that came to you and said, I've got this beautiful distressed asset fund, I'm going to run around your state and I'm going to buy up all of these distressed single family homes like we did in 0809. I'm going to boot all these poor people out of these houses, and then I'm going to flip them to a REIT, and we're going to make a killing. And you guys should give us a lot of money. I would hope that most trustees would pause and say, is that good for the thing that we are here to do? And hopefully the answer would be no. So there are limits on what you should be doing as a investor, given your profile and your stature and your mission, et cetera. I think the functional question just is, does a CDFI investment strategy serve that larger purpose? And that I think is an individual question, right? As opposed to a universal one.
Yeah.
And I would just add that I think we talked about this a couple of times, is I think people are still getting to know the CDFI industry, who we are, what do we do, who do we serve? and getting comfortable with us as a community. And so I think over the past decade that has grown, but I still think there's some work to do. And I think that plays into everything that Aaron just talked about too.
Terry Link has posted another comment. Aren't public higher education institutions more like social benefit corporations, and thereby the fiduciary argument is trumped by the social and or environmental impact returns? So one could certainly, I would say one could certainly make that argument. We obviously do need some return on investment from our endowment because that's what underwrites a lot of what happens at this institution. But one could easily make the argument that at least some of those resources ought to be going into serving social benefit as opposed to simply highest return on investment. But I think there's a discussion to be had because, as Aaron noted, there are different views on this that
somebody somewhere at Michigan State is writing a PhD thesis on this right now, I hope, or somewhere in the world, somebody I am sure is writing a thesis.
So I would just say, as someone who spent her career working at the intersection of for-profit corporations, envisioning how they could improve their social benefits and become certified for that you would be rare in finding a sector that could show more data about their positive impacts in communities than in the CDFI industry. Most of us could, at the turn of a hat, give you job creation numbers, give you numbers around the amount of money that's been invested in low-income communities and communities of color and women and veterans in the lowest income census tracts in the state. That is our purpose. It is what we are certified to do. It is our focus. And in some ways, we're data rich and resource poor. And so what we need is more entities who will invest in us to continue to do this research, but we can definitely prove those impacts and environmental impacts as well. That's
a wonderful story. So I think we are now about 15 minutes over when we said we would stop. And I know that it's the evening, and so it's only fair to I think at this point, thank our speakers. Thank you very, very much. It's been an inspiring set of talks. And we as a team have really, you all have helped us do what we wanted you to do this evening. And so we're very, very pleased. We certainly hope that you will stick with us. We will be having another forum in about 2 months, right? Yeah, in about 2 months, when we hope to roll out sort of what we've been able to find through the research we're doing and try to make a proposal for how do we move MSU towards doing this. So thank you again. Have a great night. Do something nice for yourselves because you all deserve it. And with that, thank you very, very much.